January of 2011 was a perfect storm in more ways than one. I was a paralegal at a large DC law firm, and I'd been a paralegal for over a decade, so I was used to having hectic times, but January of 2011 was one of the most hectic and work-filled months I'd ever had. And I worked mainly for two practice groups. The first was the Energy Law Group, and the second was the United States Supreme Court Group. And in January of 2011, both groups had very big projects that I personally had to work on. And for the Energy Group, it was a huge filing that was due on January 21st. And when I say huge, I mean we had to rent a U-Haul to get the documents to the courthouse because they wouldn't fit in a regular truck. And for the United States Supreme Court Group, there were several cases that we had different briefs due, and they all fell in the month of January 2011. So from January 3rd to January 28th, I worked 4 90-hour weeks in a row. That's 3 months of work in one, in case you're doing the math. And so needless to say, I was exhausted. So I went into work on January 26th, and luckily I was in the home stretch. The big filing was done, all the briefs were done except for one last brief. So all I had to do was put my head down and just power through to the end, and I could sleep for a week, which I did. So I went on the 26th, I had one brief to do, I'm doing it, I'm powering through, and I hear people on the hallway talking about leaving early, which didn't really happen in law firms that much. And they start talking about a storm that's supposed to hit. And at this point, I barely had time to shower, so I was not up on the local news and weather. So I find out that there's a snowstorm that's supposed to hit right in the middle of rush hour, and that several places were sending their employees home early. Well, leaving the office in daylight? Yeah, sign me up for that. So I grabbed my stuff, I jumped in my car, and I started to head from DC to my house in Centerville. And usually that takes an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe. And I was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was still raining. So I thought, oh, this is fine. It's still raining. I'll get home. I'll work on my brief from home. It'll be great. And instead of taking 495 or 66, I decided to take Route 50, because I needed to get gas. So I figured I would get gas when I got outside of the city. So I went through Arlington and Alexandria, and as I was going into Fairfax County, the rain started to turn to sleet and snow. And it stuck immediately, and the roads deteriorated really fast. But I was almost to where I knew I was going to get gas, which is where 50 goes underneath the Beltway. And traffic just stopped. And I thought, okay. So we sat there for a little bit, and I thought, there's been an accident. They'll move the cars. It'll be fine. And I didn't move for an hour. And that's when I realized this could be a really bad night. So I turned on, because I had music on, and so I turned on the news, and I heard that basically every road in the entire city was gridlocked. And so I sat there in my car and didn't move and cried. Because I just sat there and I watched my gas gauge drop to almost empty. And I was literally almost out of gas, but figuratively, I was out of gas. Emotionally, mentally, physically, I was on empty. I had nothing left. And I sat in my car and I cried, and I talked to my sister, who could of course not help me because she was at home. And I was just like, I'm gonna run out of gas in the middle of Route 50, and I'm gonna have to walk home in a snowstorm. And I was 13 miles from home. And I started thinking, do I walk home in a snowstorm or do I sleep in my car? And those are horrible options. So I just cried, and I was done. I couldn't cope with this situation. And I realized that in 3 hours I had moved 3/10 of a mile. But that 3/10 of a mile was just enough to get me so that I could cry my way across some traffic to get to a side street to get gas and get food and go to the bathroom. So, yes, thank you. So I was empty where I needed to be, and I was full where I needed to be, and it was 4.5 hours into this odyssey, and I had my second wind. So obviously I was not going to get back on 50 because nothing was happening. I found out that there were trees like across 50 between me and my house, so there was no way I was getting anywhere. And I knew that every road was horrible, but I figured, let's try the Beltway. No trees on the Beltway. So I inched my way toward the Beltway, and I finally got on the ramp, and I was getting onto the Beltway, and it was about 8:45 at this point, and my phone rings, and it's my friend Colby. And he is like, hey, he's just a good dude, and was just calling to see if I was stuck in this mess. And I informed him through tears that yes, I was stuck in this mess. And so he's asking me where I am, and I'm trying to sob through where I am. And he says, hang on, you're really close to where I am. I'm stuck at work. I'm like half a mile from you. I'll borrow an SUV and I'll come get you. And I was like, okay, great, yes, I'll find a place to abandon my car. And he says, abandon your car? You can't abandon your car. And that's when I realized that Colby didn't know what it was like out here in the dress rehearsal for the zombie apocalypse, because abandoning my car was nothing. So I was like, don't worry about it, just call me when you're on your way and we'll figure this out. So I was about to go under an overpass, and I pulled over onto the shoulder underneath the bridge, which I have to say was prime real estate for car abandonment. So I feel like I did really well there. And I grabbed my work bag, and I walked in pouring snow down the middle of 495, which was either not dangerous because no one was moving, or super dangerous and I just did not care. And I'm on the phone with Colby, and he's like, I'm here, and I'm like, I'm here, and I realize he's about to take a turn down onto where I was, to 495, and I was like, don't come down here. Do not come down here, because you won't be able to get out. And I don't know if he didn't hear me, or if he didn't believe me, or more likely, he just saw his friend walking through this frozen hellscape and panicked and drove down to get me. And so I'm soaked, and I get in the car, and I was so happy because after 6 hours on my own, I was finally with somebody, and we were in this together, and we were going to make it through. And I was so happy to see him that I didn't even say I told you so when we sat on 495. But it didn't take more than a few minutes for us both to realize that there weren't any cars coming on the opposite direction of 495. There must have been an accident or something that was stopping everybody. So Colby embraced the anarchy of the situation and drove across the grass median the wrong way on 495 for about a quarter of a mile, did a U-turn, got up the ramp. We got to his office, we sat up all night, we ate strangers' food, well, strangers to me, he knew them. We watched movies that to this day I hate because I was so miserable while I watched them. And we watched Google Maps traffic, and we just watched everything kind of break up. And finally at 5 o'clock in the morning, we got back to my car, which was there with a lot of other cars. And I got home about 6 o'clock. I had 2 very hungry kitty cats. I fed them. I slept for a couple hours. And despite the fact that I had emailed work to tell them that I was stuck in the snowpocalypse and I didn't know how or when I was going to get home, I still had to work on my brief. So that's why 6 months later I had a new job, but that's a different story for a different day. Thank you.